Rummy Khan was the kind of man who drew admiration everywhere he went. A self-made millionaire in his early 30s, he carried himself with effortless charisma, his sharp mind and generosity earning him both respect and loyalty in the cutthroat world of business. But beyond the boardrooms and the headlines, his greatest pride and joy was waiting for him at home. Ayla. Ayla, with her warm smile and quiet grace, was 7 months pregnant with their first child. The sight of her still took Rummy's breath away. Every morning before heading to work, he would pause just to watch her, her hands protectively cradling her growing belly, her laughter filling the house like music. Their love was obvious to anyone who saw them. Rummy was fiercely protective of her, often fussing over her health and insisting she rest while he handled everything else. In her, he'd found the kind of peace and happiness he'd never thought possible in his tumultuous family. But not everyone shared his joy. Ayla's relationship with Samia, Rummy's cousin and longtime business partner, was strained at best. Samia, who had helped Rummy build his empire from the ground up, seemed to bristle every time she saw them together. Her smiles never quite reached her eyes, and her compliments to Ayla always carried the faintest trace of condescension. "She doesn't like me," Ayla admitted one afternoon as they sat together on the veranda, her hand resting on his. "She doesn't have to," Rummy replied without hesitation. "You're my wife. That's all that matters." But Ayla, ever the peacemaker, refused to give up. She believed in giving people chances, even Samir. "Let me invite her to dinner," she suggested gently. "Maybe if she sees how happy we are, she'll come around." Rummy's jaw tightened at the thought. "Samir isn't what she seems, Ayla," he warned. "There's a darkness in her you don't see." But Ayla only smiled at him softly, her hand squeezing his. That evening, as they welcomed Samir into their home, Ayla wore her best dress and her brightest smile. But Rummy couldn't help but notice the way Samir's eyes lingered on them, not with affection, but with a bitterness she tried, and failed, to mask. It was a look that would haunt Rummy long after that night. The dining room glowed warmly under the crystal chandelier, the table beautifully set with fine china and candles that flickered between them. Ayla, always the gracious hostess, had gone out of her way to make everything perfect, from the soft background music to the carefully chosen menu of Samir's favorite dishes. At first, Samir appeared charming, complimenting Ayla on the decor and remarking on how lovely she looked. But beneath the polite exterior, her eyes glittered with something sharper. "You've really done a beautiful job here," Samir said sweetly, glancing around the room. "Though I imagine it must be hard for you to manage all this in your delicate condition." Ayla smiled, though Rummy caught the faint flush of embarrassment on her cheeks. "It's not as hard as you'd think," she replied softly. Samir sipped her wine, then set her glass down with a faint clink. Well, not everyone's cut out for this kind of life. High society, business dinners, galas, it can be a bit overwhelming for someone without experience." Rummy's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Ayla touched his hand gently under the table. "I'm learning," she said, her voice calm but firm, "and I have Rummy to guide me." Samir gave a thin, insincere smile. "Of course. Though I sometimes wonder if he wouldn't be better off with someone who already knew how to navigate it all." Rummy's eyes darkened at that, but Samir quickly changed the subject, laughing lightly as though nothing had happened. Throughout dinner, her comments continued, subtle digs cloaked in civility. She asked if Ayla planned to hire a full-time nanny since it would be hard to juggle motherhood and being Rummy's wife. She remarked on Ayla's simple dress, saying she always admired women who didn't care much about fashion. And every so often, when Ayla looked down at her plate, Samir's gaze shifted to Rummy, possessive, calculating, almost daring him to notice. When dinner finally ended, Ayla excused herself to rest, leaving Rummy and Samir alone. Samir lingered by the table, swirling the last of her wine in her glass. "She doesn't belong here, Rummy," she said finally, her voice low and deliberate. "You're wasting yourself on a woman who'll never fit into your world. We both know you deserve better." Rummy rose from his chair, his face hard. "You need to leave," he said coldly. "And don't you ever come between me and my wife again. You won't like where it ends." For the first time all evening, Samia's smile faltered. Without another word, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the marble floor, leaving behind an air heavy with unspoken threats. Samia stormed out of Rummy's home that evening with her head held high, but behind her carefully painted mask of composure was a roiling fury she could barely contain. How dare he humiliate her like that? Dismiss her, cast her aside for that simpering little wife who didn't even belong in their world. From the backseat of her chauffeured car, Samia stared out at the darkened streets, her manicured nails digging into her palm. If he can't see what's best for him, she muttered through clenched teeth, then I'll make him see. And when she's gone, he'll finally realize who truly deserves to stand at his side. That night, she began putting her plan into motion. The next day, Samia visited one of her oldest contacts, a chemist who owed her more than a few favors, and procured a vial of a rare, slow-acting poison. Tasteless, odorless, it mimicked the symptoms of natural pregnancy complications, making it nearly impossible to trace. She won't even know what's happening to her, the chemist assured her as she tucked the vial into her purse. The next step was finding someone on the inside. Samia began watching the house discreetly, noting the comings and goings of the staff. One evening, she approached Sadaf, the young housemaid who cleaned and helped Ayla daily. Samia cornered her outside the market, slipping an envelope of cash into her hand. I just want to make sure she's healthy, Samia lied smoothly. Tell me, does she have any habits? Anything she eats or drinks regularly? Frightened and flustered, Sadaf revealed that Ayla drank a cup of herbal tea every night before bed. Samia's lips curved into a predatory smile. A few nights later, Samia returned, this time with a small jar of loose tea leaves. A special blend, she said, pressing it into Sadaf's shaking hands. Start serving her this. If you refuse, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I know where your children go to school. Tears welled in Sadaf's eyes as she nodded, too terrified to resist. Samia watched her scurry back into the house, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. Soon, she murmured to herself, she'll be gone, and Rummy will finally be mine. That evening, the house was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of golden lamps as Ayla settled on the couch with her customary cup of herbal tea. She cradled the steaming mug between her hands, inhaling the fragrant aroma that always soothed her before bed. She smiled to herself as she felt the faint flutter of the baby kicking, her free hand instinctively resting on her belly. Sadaf hovered nearby, her expression unreadable, but Ayla barely noticed. Thank you, Sadaf, she said warmly, sipping the tea. At first, it was nothing, just a faint tightness in her stomach. But minutes later, the cramps intensified, sharp and sudden, making her gasp and double over. Her head began to spin, and her vision blurred as the pain spread through her abdomen like wildfire. Sadaf, she choked out, clutching her belly as she tried to stand. But her legs buckled, and she crumpled to the floor, her breathing shallow and erratic. Sadaf froze in terror for a heartbeat before snapping into action, fumbling for the phone and calling Rummy. Her voice was frantic, high-pitched, barely coherent. Sir, it's Madam. She's collapsed. You have to come. Please, hurry. On the other end of the line, Rummy's world went still. Without another word, he dropped his phone, stormed out of his meeting, and sprinted to his car. The drive felt endless, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened, his mind filled with nothing but her face and the thought, not her, not the baby. Please. When he buzzed through the front door minutes later, he found her lying motionless on the living room floor, her skin ashen, her breath shallow. Ayla, he shouted, falling to his knees beside her. He scooped her up in his arms, cradling her protectively as he carried her out to the car. Sadaf trailed behind, tears streaking down her face, but Rummy didn't even spare her a glance. At the hospital, everything became a blur of shouting nurses and beeping monitors. He refused to let go of her hand as the doctors worked frantically, hooking her up to fours, monitoring the baby's heartbeat. Hours later, a doctor finally approached him, his expression grave. She's stable, for now, and so is the baby. But she was poisoned. We're still running tests to determine what exactly she ingested. Rummy's entire body went cold at the words. Poisoned. He returned to her bedside, sinking into the chair, his hand finding hers. Her fingers were still warm, but she didn't stay. Leaning closer, his voice low and shaking with fury, he whispered into the stillness. Whoever did this to you, whoever dared to hurt you and our child, I swear, Ayla, they'll pay. I'll make them regret the day they were born. And in his eyes burned a promise of vengeance that nothing and no one could escape. The hospital room was dim and quiet, except for the steady beep of Ayla's heart monitor and the faint rhythm of their baby's heartbeat from the machine beside her bed. Rummy sat at her side, his fingers intertwined with hers as he stared blankly at the floor. But beneath his calm exterior, a storm was brewing. Someone had tried to kill his wife, his unborn child, and he was going to find out who. The very next morning, Rummy called in an elite private investigator, Zayn Malik, a man known for his discretion and effectiveness in handling the darkest of scandals. I don't care what it takes, Rummy told him coldly. I want names, proof, and I want it fast. Zayn wasted no time. Over the next 48 hours, he quietly dug into every person who had access to the Khan household. He spoke to the staff, checked deliveries, even reviewed the guest log from the week before. But the breakthrough came from the CCTV system. Late one night, Zayn arrived at Rummy's office with a USB drive in hand. Without a word, he plugged it into the laptop and hit play. The footage was clear. Samia, dressed impeccably as always, entering through the side door just hours before Ayla collapsed. In her hands, a small jar. She slipped into the kitchen, exchanged a few words with the maid, then left minutes later, her expression cold and satisfied. Rummy's stomach churned as he watched. She didn't even try to hide it, Zayn muttered grimly. Next came the maid. Zayn brought her into the office, and under the weight of Rummy's piercing stare and Zayn's quiet prodding, she broke down in tears. She made me do it, the maid sobbed. She said if I didn't, she'd ruin my family. I didn't want to hurt Madam, I swear. But she gave me the tea and told me to serve it. I didn't know what else to do. Rummy didn't say a word. Finally, Zayn handed over a folder thick with printed emails and text screenshots, messages Samia had sent to a friend over the past few months, filled with venom. She stole everything that was supposed to be mine. She doesn't deserve him. I do. And I'll make sure she's out of the way soon. Rummy closed the folder with a snap, his jaw set. His heartbreak turned into a rage so sharp it felt like fire in his veins. Samia's obsession, her malice, her betrayal. She had no idea yet, but she had just made the greatest mistake of her life. The next afternoon, Rummy sat in his office, the sleek glass windows casting sharp lines of sunlight across his desk. Everything was in place, the evidence laid out neatly in a folder, and his phone's recorder ready to capture every word that was about to unfold. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his face a mask of composure that belied the storm inside him. Moments later, Samia swept into the room, dressed immaculately in a tailored navy suit, her lips painted a bold red. Rummy, she paired, her tone dripping with faux concern. I came as soon as I heard about poor Ayla. Is she recovering? Her words were sweet, but her eyes betrayed her satisfaction. Rummy rose, offering her a small, polite smile as he gestured for her to sit. Thank you for coming, Samia, he said smoothly. There's something important we need to discuss. Business-related, of course. Samia's lips curved into a knowing smirk as she sat down across from him, crossing her legs. I thought you'd see reason eventually, she said. I've always been here for you, Rummy. For a moment, he let her believe it. Then he slid the folder across the desk and flipped it open. One by one, he laid out the evidence, the CCTV stills of her entering his home with the jar, the maid's signed confession, the toxicology report confirming poison in Ayla's system. Samia's smile faltered. What is this supposed to prove? She scoffed, though her voice wavered. Rummy's expression hardened. Don't insult me, Samia. You poisoned my wife and nearly killed my child. And if I take this to the police, it won't just end your career, it'll destroy you. Her facade cracked. Her face twisted with rage as she shot up from her chair, her voice rising. "She ruined everything. I was supposed to be the one by your side. Not her. I only did what had to be done, to save you from her." Rummy let her words hang in the air, his phone recording every venomous syllable. When she finally fell silent, he stood, towering over her, his tone icy. "You mean nothing to me now," he said coldly. "Leave, and don't ever come near my family again." Samia's eyes widened in shock as she stumbled backward, realizing too late that she had just sealed her own downfall. The morning after his confrontation with Samia, Rummy sat alone at his desk, staring at the skyline of the city he had once conquered with her by his side. He thought of Ayla, still fragile in her hospital bed, and of his unborn child, who had almost been stolen from him before even entering the world. The evidence against Samia was damning, more than enough to put her behind bars for attempted murder. But prison, Rummy thought, would be too easy, too private. What Samia feared more than anything was not punishment, but humiliation. And so, he would give her exactly that. That afternoon, Rummy called an emergency board meeting. The executives of Khan Industries filed in one by one, murmuring among themselves at the unusual summons. At the head of the long oak table, Rummy stood with a folder in his hands, his face a mask of grim resolve. When Samia arrived, late, as always, she strode in with forced confidence, though Rummy could see the flicker of unease in her eyes as she took her seat. Rummy didn't waste time. He stood, addressing the room in a steady voice as he laid out the evidence of her betrayal, the footage of her entering his home, the toxicology report proving poison, the maid's testimony. Gasps and whispers rippled through the boardroom as he spoke. "She not only endangered my wife and child," Rummy finished coldly, "but she attempted to sabotage the reputation and integrity of this company by tying it to her actions." Effective immediately, Samia Khan is stripped of her shares, her voting rights revoked, and her position terminated. Legal transfer documents are being signed as we speak. Samia leapt to her feet, shouting, her carefully curated mask shattering. "You can't do this to me. This company is mine as much as yours." But Rummy only stayed back, unflinching. "Not anymore. Get out." Her protests fell on deaf ears as security escorted her out of the building. But Rummy wasn't finished. That evening, he ordered her trust fund frozen and liquidated. Millions were donated under Ayla's name to charities that supported single mothers and abused women, a symbolic and public rejection of Samia's cruelty. Then, the next morning, Rummy stood before a sea of reporters at a press conference. Cameras flashed and microphones crowded around as he calmly recounted Samia's plot to poison his pregnant wife, showing the evidence for all to see. "I am disowning Samia Khan," he declared. "She no longer has any place in my life, personally or professionally." The next day's headlines screamed across the front pages. "Millionaire destroys cousin's life after she tried to kill his pregnant wife." From boardroom to rock bottom, Samia Khan's fall from grace. Samia became the talk of the city, her name synonymous with disgrace. The business community shunned her, old allies cutting ties to save their own reputations. She was evicted from her luxury apartment within weeks, unable to afford the lifestyle she'd once flaunted. Even those who had once fawned over her now turned their backs, unwilling to be associated with a scandal. And still, Rummy's revenge was not fueled by cruelty, but by justice. Before leaving the office that day, he called Sadaf, the maid who had reluctantly carried out Samia's orders, into his office. She stood trembling, unable to meet his gaze. "You're leaving the city tonight," Rummy told her gently. "You'll have a job waiting for you in another household, far from here. And this," he slid an envelope of cash toward her, "is to help you start fresh. Don't ever look back." Sadaf's eyes filled with tears as she whispered her gratitude before quietly slipping away. Rummy exhaled deeply, watching the city lights through his office window. Samia was finished. His family was safe. And justice, at last, had been served. The days in the hospital passed slowly, but for the first time in weeks, Rummy allowed himself to feel hope again. Ayla was growing stronger each day, her color returning and her smile, though faint, lighting up the sterile room every time he walked in. He never left her side, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair by her bed, holding her hand even when she drifted off. One morning, as the sun filtered through the blinds, the doctor finally came in with good news. "She's recovering beautifully," he said with a reassuring smile. "And the baby is doing just fine. There's no sign of lasting harm from the trauma. You both are incredibly lucky." Rummy let out a breath he hadn't even realized he was holding, his hand tightening gently over Ayla's as tears of relief welled in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely, his gaze fixed on his wife as she slept peacefully. Months later, their lives felt whole again when Ayla was wheeled into the delivery room. Rummy stood at her side, his heart pounding with equal parts fear and excitement as she brought their child into the world. The sound of their baby's first cry filled the room, and the nurse placed a tiny, wriggling bundle into Ayla's arms. "She's perfect," Ayla breathed, her eyes shimmering as she gazed down at the little girl. Rummy sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arms around both of them, overcome by a rush of emotion. "We'll name her Amira," Ayla whispered. "It means princess." Rummy pressed a kiss to his daughter's soft forehead, then to Ayla's temple. Cradling his new family close, he vowed quietly, so only they could hear, "I swear to you both, nothing in this world will ever hurt you again. Not as long as I'm alive." And in that moment, he knew his family was everything. Months passed, and the storm that had once threatened to tear Rummy's life apart finally settled into calm. Their home, once filled with tension and fear, now glowed with warmth and laughter. On a crisp spring evening, Rummy and Ayla opened their doors to a small, private gathering, a quiet celebration of survival, love, and new beginnings. Only their closest friends and family had been invited, the people who had stood by them through the darkest of times. The living room buzzed with soft music and warm conversation, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air. Ayla, radiant as ever, moved gracefully between guests, holding little Amira in her arms. Their daughter giggled and cooed, her tiny fingers clutching at her mother's hair as people leaned in to admire her. Later, as the guests settled into easy chatter and Ayla slipped away into the kitchen for a quiet moment, Rummy followed her. He found her leaning against the counter, watching their daughter sleep in her crib, her lips curved in a soft smile. She turned to him when she felt his presence, her eyes shimmering in the dim light. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice full of emotion, "for standing by me, for choosing us over everything else." Rummy stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her. "There was never a choice to make," he said gently. "You and Amira, you're my everything." Later that night, as the house finally quieted and the last of their friends had gone, Rummy sank into the sofa, his daughter nestled in his arms. He glanced at the muted television across the room, a breaking news segment showing Samir being evicted from yet another apartment, pleading into the cameras for help as her former friends turned their backs. He watched her desperation for a moment, feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just indifference. He reached for the remote and shut off the screen, then looked down at his daughter, who was giggling up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Smiling softly, he whispered into the stillness of the room, "This is my family now. Nothing else matters." And in that moment, he knew he had finally found peace.